I still can't believe it happened, even though it's been years. It was the day of my college graduation, a moment I'd dreamt of for so long, filled with hope and the promise of a new beginning. But instead of congratulations, my phone buzzed with a text from my dad, a message that hit me like a physical blow. Don't expect help from me ever again. Can you even imagine that? On one of the biggest days of my life, the person who was supposed to be celebrating me was instead delivering a final, brutal cut. And then, just hours later, as I was still reeling from his words, my CFO called me about the IPO. The juxtaposition was so stark, so unbelievably dramatic, it felt like something out of a movie. What would you have done if your entire world was turned upside down in a single day, one part of it crumbling while another soared beyond your wildest dreams? Let me take you back to the beginning to understand just how deep this cut went, and why that call from my CFO was so much more than just a business update. My childhood was, to put it mildly, complicated. My dad, Mark, was a successful businessman, a self-made man who always prided himself on his intelligence and his ability to navigate the corporate world. From a young age, I was taught that success was the only currency that mattered, and that anything less than perfection was failure. He had built his company from the ground up, a medium-sized manufacturing firm, and he expected me to follow in his footsteps, to take over the family business. The problem was, I never wanted to. My passion was in technology, in the innovative, fast-paced world of startups, not in the traditional, sometimes rigid, manufacturing sector. This was a source of constant friction between us. Every family dinner was a subtle, or not so subtle, interrogation about my career plans, my internships, my network. He'd scoff at my ideas, dismiss my dreams as childish fantasies, and constantly remind me that I was setting myself up for failure if I didn't listen to his wisdom. My mom, Sarah, was caught in the middle. She was a kind, gentle soul who always tried to mediate, to soften my dad's harsh criticisms, but she was rarely successful. She loved us both fiercely, but she also deferred to my dad's authority in most matters, convinced that he always knew best. My younger sister, Emily, had it easier. She was naturally artistic and had no interest in business, so my dad largely ignored her career path, focusing all his pressure on me, his eldest son, the supposed heir. This created a subtle resentment in me, a feeling of being constantly scrutinized and judged, while Emily got to pursue her passions relatively unburdened. I remember one Christmas, when I was about 15, I proudly showed my dad a rudimentary app I'd coded. It was simple, just a game, but I was so proud of learning the language and making something from scratch. He barely glanced at it, telling me I was wasting my time on frivolous pursuits, when I should be learning about supply chains and market analysis. It crushed me. Despite the constant pressure, I excelled in school. I was a student, partly out of a desire to prove him wrong, and partly because I genuinely loved learning. I got into a prestigious university, something my dad took immense pride in, often boasting about it to his friends and business associates, conveniently forgetting to mention how little he supported my chosen field of study. I majored in computer science, much to his chagrin. He'd make passive-aggressive comments about it, like, "Hope you're learning how to make a real living, not just playing with computers all day." It was infuriating. During my summers, instead of interning at his company, I sought out internships at tech startups, often having to fight tooth and nail with him for permission, or sometimes just going behind his back. I wanted to build something new, something innovative, something that could genuinely change the world. It wasn't about the money for me, not initially anyway. It was about the impact, the creation, the challenge. My dad, however, only saw dollar signs and traditional power structures. He wanted me to be a mini-him, and I simply wasn't. My senior year of college was a whirlwind. I was working on my final project, a complex AI-driven platform for resource allocation, and also juggling interviews with various tech companies. I had a vision, a dream, and I was working tirelessly to make it a reality. One company, a relatively new startup called InnovateX, particularly caught my attention. They were in the early stages of developing revolutionary cloud infrastructure, and their mission aligned perfectly with my aspirations. I aced the interviews, and they offered me a position as a software engineer. It wasn't a huge salary, but it was enough to live comfortably, and more importantly, it was a chance to be part of something groundbreaking. I called my dad, excited to share the news, hoping that perhaps, just perhaps, he'd finally see that I was capable of building a successful career outside of his shadow. His response was chilling. "InnovateX, never heard of them. Why aren't you coming to work for me? You think some fly-by-night startup is going to give you stability. You're making a huge mistake, son. A huge mistake. You're throwing away everything I've built for you." The conversation quickly devolved into an argument, one of many we'd had over the years. He accused me of being ungrateful, of disrespecting his legacy, of deliberately choosing a path just to spite him. I tried to explain my passion, my vision, but he wasn't listening. He never did. He ended the call by saying, "Fine. If you want to go your own way, don't come crying to me when it all falls apart. You're on your own." Those words echoed in my mind for weeks. It wasn't just a threat. It felt like a declaration of war. My mom tried to smooth things over, telling me he was just worried, but I knew better. This was about control, about his inability to accept that I was my own person. I took the job at InnovateX. It was challenging, exhilarating, and exactly what I wanted. I poured my heart and soul into the work, often staying late, coding through weekends, driven by the belief that we were building something truly special. The team was small, but incredibly talented and passionate. We were a family, united by a common goal. I learned more in my first year there than I had in all my years of college. The company started to gain traction, attracting investors, securing major clients. We were growing fast. My role evolved, and I quickly moved up the ranks, eventually becoming a lead engineer. I was thriving, both professionally and personally. I even managed to save up a decent amount of money, enough to be truly independent. During this time, my relationship with my dad remained strained. We'd speak on holidays, mostly superficial conversations, where he'd still manage to slip in subtle digs about my career. He'd ask about my salary, compare it to what I could have been making at his company, and lament my poor choices. It was exhausting, and honestly, it made me dread those calls. My mom would occasionally visit, bringing updates about Emily and trying to bridge the gap between my dad and me, but it was always an uphill battle. I learned to just nod and smile, letting his words wash over me, focusing on my own success and happiness, which he seemed determined to ignore. 2 years into my time at InnovateX, things really started to accelerate. We had a breakthrough with our core technology, securing a massive round of funding and attracting the attention of major tech giants. The talk around the office shifted from if to when we would go public. The energy was electric. Everyone was working harder than ever, fueled by the anticipation of what was to come. I was promoted again, this time to a senior management position, overseeing a team of engineers. My stock options, which had seemed like a distant dream when I first started, were now looking incredibly promising. I was finally building something of my own, something significant, something he could never take away from me. Then came my graduation day. I had finished my degree a year earlier, but the university had a single annual commencement ceremony, so I was finally getting to walk across that stage. My mom and Emily were there, beaming with pride, taking countless photos. My dad, however, was nowhere to be seen. He had claimed he had a critical business meeting. He couldn't miss, a convenient excuse that didn't surprise me in the slightest. I tried not to let it bother me, to focus on the joy of the day, but a part of me, the part that still yearned for his approval, felt a familiar ache. As I sat there, waiting for my name to be called, surrounded by my peers, my phone vibrated. I glanced at it and saw his name. My heart did a little flutter, a desperate hope that maybe, just maybe, he was sending a belated congratulations. But then I read the text, "Don't expect help from me ever again." No context, no explanation, just that cold, sharp dismissal. It was a final severing, a declaration that I was truly, utterly alone in his eyes. The timing was almost cruelly poetic. On the day, I was supposed to be celebrating my academic achievement and looking forward to a bright future. He chose that moment to extinguish any remaining flicker of hope for reconciliation. I felt a wave of nausea, a profound sense of hurt and betrayal. It wasn't just about money or support. It was about the complete absence of paternal love and affirmation. He couldn't even offer a simple congratulations. I tried to push it out of my mind, to focus on the ceremony, but his words kept replaying in my head. I walked across the stage, accepted my diploma, and smiled for the cameras, but inside I was a mess. After the ceremony, my mom and Emily hugged me tight, oblivious to the emotional bomb that had just been dropped. We went out for a celebratory dinner, and I did my best to appear cheerful, to not cast a shadow over their excitement. But the weight of my dad's text was heavy on my chest. I excused myself to the restroom, needing a moment to compose myself. As I was splashing water on my face, my phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello," I said, my voice still a little shaky. "Is this my name?" a familiar voice asked. It was David Chen, our CFO at Innovate X. My heart pounded. "Yes, David, it is. Everything okay?" I asked, a new kind of anxiety bubbling up. He chuckled. "More than okay, my name. You know all those rumors about the IPO. Well, they're not rumors anymore. The board just approved it. We're going public next month, and given your crucial role in developing our core tech, your stock options are going to be worth a small fortune. Congratulations, seriously, this is huge." The words hit me like a tidal wave. IPO, small fortune, it was happening. Everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed for, was finally coming to fruition. In a single phone call, on the same day my father had disowned me, my financial future, my career aspirations, everything I had envisioned for myself, became real. The irony was almost unbearable. My dad had effectively told me I was worthless, that I wouldn't amount to anything without his help, and mere hours later, I was being told I was about to become incredibly wealthy. I felt a strange mix of elation, vindication, and a profound sadness for the relationship I had lost. I thanked David, managing to keep my voice steady, and promised to be at the office first thing in the morning. When I returned to the table, my mom and Emily noticed my flushed face. "What's wrong?" my mom asked, concerned. "Nothing," I said, a wide, genuine smile finally spreading across my face. "Everything is absolutely perfect." I couldn't tell them about the IPO yet. It was confidential. But I could feel the shift, the monumental change in my life. The weight lifted, replaced by an exhilarating sense of freedom. So that's the situation I was in, and I had to make a choice. Here I was, effectively disowned by my father, but on the cusp of unimaginable financial success, all because I followed my own path, something he had explicitly forbidden. Before I tell you what happened next, I want you to pause and comment below what you would have done in my shoes. Would you have reached out to him, tried to explain, or would you have reveled in your success, knowing you proved him wrong? What would your next move have been? The weeks leading up to the IPO were a blur of meetings, presentations, and frenzied excitement. The entire company was buzzing. When the day finally came, it was surreal. We stood on the floor of the stock exchange, watching the numbers tick up, celebrating with champagne and tears. It was everything I had ever dreamt of and more. My stock options, once just a theoretical number on a contract, were now worth millions. I was, effectively, a millionaire overnight. The first thing I did, after a much-needed celebration with my colleagues, was to buy my mom a new house, a beautiful place with a big garden, something she had always dreamed of but could never afford. She cried tears of joy, and it was one of the most fulfilling moments of my life. I also set up a substantial trust fund for Emily's art education and future endeavors, ensuring she would never have to compromise her passions for financial stability. I didn't tell my dad any of this. I maintained my distance, focusing on my work and my newfound independence. I was happy, truly happy, for the first time in a long time. About 6 months after the IPO, a mutual acquaintance, a business associate of my dad's, casually mentioned to him that InnovateX had gone public and that I was one of the key players, now incredibly wealthy. Apparently, the news hit him like a ton of bricks. He was utterly shocked. He had dismissed my career as a frivolous pursuit for so long that the reality of my success was incomprehensible to him. Suddenly, the phone calls started. Not from him, not directly, but from my mom, urging me to call him, saying he was distraught and wanted to talk. I ignored the calls for a while. The hurt was still too raw, but eventually my mom's pleas wore me down. She genuinely believed he had seen the error of his ways. I called him, steeling myself for another argument, but the person on the other end of the line was a different man. His voice was subdued, almost timid. He didn't yell, he didn't criticize, he apologized, "Son." He said, his voice cracking, I was wrong. I was so incredibly wrong. I let my own pride, my own expectations, blind me to your talent, to your vision. I heard about InnovateX. I heard about your success. I'm so proud of you, son. More proud than you'll ever know. It was an apology I had waited my entire life to hear. But it was also tainted. Was he truly sorry for how he had treated me? Or was he just sorry that he had misjudged my potential for wealth? The thought lingered, a bitter taste in my mouth. He then started to tell me about his own company. It was struggling. A major client had pulled out. A new competitor was eating into his market share, and he was facing significant financial difficulties. He hinted, not subtly, that he needed help, that he was hoping I could lend a hand, given my newfound resources. This was the climax, the moment of truth. My dad, the man who told me not to expect help from him, was now asking me for it. My mind flashed back to that graduation text, to all the years of belittling and dismissal. The irony was palpable, almost poetic. I took a deep breath. "Dad," I said, my voice calm, "I appreciate your apology. It means a lot to hear you say you're proud, but as for your company, you told me yourself, you told me not to expect help from you ever again. You said I was on my own, and I listened. I built my own path with no help from you, just as you wanted, and now I'm going to continue on that path, focusing on my own ventures and my own future. I wish you the best with your business, but I'm not in a position to get involved." There was a long silence on the other end. Then a sigh, a deep, heavy sigh. "I understand," he finally said, his voice barely a whisper. "I guess I deserve that." And that was it. We ended the call shortly after. The aftermath was surprisingly peaceful. My relationship with my mom and Emily grew even stronger. They understood my decision, even if my mom still harbored a hope for reconciliation that I no longer shared. My dad eventually sold his company, taking a significant loss, but he managed to retire comfortably enough. He never asked me for money again, nor did he try to interfere with my life. We now have a cordial, albeit distant, relationship. We speak on holidays, and the conversations are polite, devoid of the previous tension. I believe he learned a valuable lesson about humility and about valuing people for who they are, not for what they can do for him. For me, it was a confirmation that I made the right choices, that following my own intuition and passion was always the right path, no matter the obstacles or the critics. So, that's my story. It's a messy, complicated journey of betrayal, triumph, and ultimately, self-discovery. My dad's text on graduation day, meant to be a final dismissal, actually set me free. It forced me to rely solely on myself, to prove my worth not to him, but to myself. And that, in the end, was the greatest gift he ever gave me. Like this video, if you were on my side throughout this whole ordeal. Subscribe for more stories like this, where real people navigate impossible situations. And please, share your final thoughts on this whole mess in the comments section below. I'm really interested to hear your perspective. I'll see you all in the next story.